The gunshot echoed through Willow Creek like thunder on a clear day, disrupting the peaceful silence of the dusty Main Street just as Hazel Montgomery was leaving the church in her wedding gown. She stood frozen, the white satin of her dress glowing in the late afternoon sun of 1878, her veil fluttering in the warm Montana breeze. The shot had come from the saloon, and moments later, a man stumbled out, clutching his side, crimson blooming beneath his fingers like a deadly rose. Hazel's wedding day had not gone as planned. The groom, a banker's son from back east, had never arrived. After 3 hours of waiting, the guests had dispersed with pitying glances, leaving Hazel alone with her shame and a dress that cost more than her family could afford. Now, as she watched the wounded man collapse face down in the dirt, she realized her day was about to become even more unexpected. "Somebody help him," she called, but the street remained empty. The townspeople had learned to stay indoors when trouble erupted at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Gathering her voluminous skirts, Hazel rushed to the fallen stranger's side. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, his duster coated with trail dust, and now soaking up blood at an alarming rate. When she carefully turned him over, his eyes fluttered open, deep blue eyes like the Montana sky at dusk. His face was handsome despite being weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of dark beard shadowing his jaw. "Madam," he whispered, "you're an angel." "I'm no angel, sir." "Just a bride without a wedding," Hazel replied, pressing her lace handkerchief against the wound in his side. "Can you stand? My home isn't far." The man tried to rise but fell back with a groan. "Name's Ryder Hayes." "I'm Hazel Montgomery. Hold on, Mr. Hayes, I'll get help." But there was no one to help. The doctor was away in Helena, and the sheriff was likely drunk in his office as he was most afternoons. With determination born of desperation, Hazel managed to help Ryder to his feet. He leaned heavily against her, his blood staining her pristine white gown as they staggered down the street toward her small house on the edge of town. "I'm sorry about your dress," he mumbled, his breath warm against her neck. "It served its purpose," Hazel replied bitterly. Or rather, it didn't. By the time they reached her home, Ryder was barely conscious. With strength she didn't know she possessed, Hazel maneuvered him inside and onto her bed. She worked quickly, cutting away his shirt to reveal a bullet wound that, thankfully, appeared to have passed clean through his side. Years of helping her father with injured ranch hands had taught her basic medical skills. "You're lucky, mister." "Hayes," she said as she cleaned the wound with whiskey from her father's cabinet. "A few inches to the right, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Ryder hissed in pain but managed a weak smile. "Lucky isn't the word I'd use for getting shot, madam, but meeting you might qualify." Hazel felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she bandaged his side with strips torn from an old sheet. "Who shot you, if you don't mind my asking?" "Man named Jenkins. Caught him cheating at cards." Ryder's eyes began to close. "Didn't expect him to have friends." "Rest now," Hazel said softly. "We can talk more when you're stronger." As Ryder drifted into unconsciousness, Hazel sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of the absurdity of her situation. Here she was, still in her wedding dress now ruined with a stranger's blood, tending to a wounded cowboy on what should have been her wedding night. Her mother would have a conniption if she knew. Margaret Montgomery arrived the next morning, letting herself in without knocking as was her custom. "Hazel Elizabeth Montgomery. The entire town is talking about." Her words died on her lips as she took in the sight of her daughter, hair disheveled, wedding dress discarded in a bloody heap on the floor, and a half-naked man unconscious in her bed. "Before you say another word, Mother," Hazel said firmly, "this man was shot in the street. He would have died if I'd left him there." Margaret pressed her lips together in a thin line. "And where, pray tell, was our esteemed sheriff while this was happening?" "Where he always is at that hour." "Sleeping off his whiskey," her mother sighed, removing her gloves. "Well, what's done is done, but you know what this means for your reputation, don't you? Taking in a strange man, spending the night alone with him." "My reputation," Hazel laughed bitterly. "What reputation, Mother?" "I was left at the altar yesterday. If anything, people will be too busy gossiping about that humiliation to notice this one." Margaret's face softened as she approached her daughter. "Oh, Hazel," Robert Caldwell is a fool and his son is cut from the same cloth. You're better off without him." "I know that," Hazel said, though the sting of rejection was still fresh. "But that doesn't change the fact that I'm now 24 years old with no prospects in a town where unmarried women my age are considered spinsters." "Well," her mother said, eyeing the unconscious cowboy with new interest, "perhaps Providence has delivered a prospect directly to your doorstep." "Mother," Hazel exclaimed, "the man is barely clinging to life, he's not a prospect." "Of course, dear. Now, let me help you change that bandage, and then you can tell me everything you know about our mysterious Mr. Hayes." Over the next few days, Ryder drifted in and out of consciousness as fever set in. Hazel stayed by his side, cooling his brow with damp cloths and forcing broth between his parched lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. She spoke to him softly during his fevered ramblings, learning fragments of his life: that he was a rancher from Wyoming, that he'd lost his land in a dispute with a cattle baron, that he'd been drifting ever since. On the fourth night, his fever broke. Hazel had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head resting on her arms at the edge of the mattress. She woke to the feeling of fingers gently stroking her hair. "You saved my life," Ryder said, his voice stronger than it had been since she'd found him. Hazel sat up quickly, embarrassed. "You're feeling better. Thanks to you." His blue eyes studied her face. "Why did you help me? You don't know me. I could be an outlaw for all you know. Are you?" she asked directly. A smile tugged at his lips. "No, madam, just a man down on his luck." "Well then, I helped you because it was the right thing to do, and perhaps because I needed something to take my mind off my own troubles that day." Ryder's gaze was disconcertingly direct. "The wedding dress. You mentioned a bride without a wedding." Hazel looked away. "It's not important now." "It is to me." His hand found hers on the blanket. "Tell me." So she did. She told him about Robert Caldwell, Jr., the banker's son who had courted her for months, promising to take her away from the small town of Willow Creek to a life of comfort in San Francisco. She told him about the preparations, the expense her father had gone to for the wedding, and the humiliation of standing in the church while the minutes ticked by and the whispers grew louder. "He sent a note," she concluded, "delivered by a stable boy an hour after the ceremony was to begin." He decided to return east instead. Apparently, he'd had second thoughts about marrying a rancher's daughter with no connections or refined education. "He sounds like a coward," Ryder said, his jaw tightening. "And a fool. Yes, well, foolish or not, he's left me in quite a predicament. At my age in a town this size." She trailed off, unwilling to voice her fears of a life spent alone. "Hazel," Ryder said, using her given name for the first time, "any man would be fortunate to have a woman like you." The sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter in a way Robert's flowery compliments never had. "You should rest," she said, rising from the chair. "You're still healing." But as she turned to leave, his hand caught hers. "Thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for sharing your story with me." Hazel squeezed his hand once before gently extracting herself. "Get some sleep, Mr. Hayes." "Ryder," he corrected. "Please call me Ryder." "Good night, Ryder," she whispered and closed the door softly behind her. As the days passed, Ryder grew stronger. Soon he was able to sit up, then stand, then move about the small house with the aid of a walking stick. Hazel found herself enjoying his company more than she cared to admit. He was different from the men she knew, straightforward yet gentle, with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with money or social standing. They fell into a comfortable routine. In the mornings, Hazel would tend to her small garden while Ryder sat on the porch, whittling or simply watching her work. In the afternoons, they would talk for hours about books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they held. In the evenings, Ryder would insist on helping prepare dinner despite Hazel's protests. "I'm not an invalid anymore," he argued one evening as he carefully sliced potatoes at her kitchen table. "And I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden," Hazel replied, stirring a pot of stew on the stove. "It's nice having someone to cook for besides myself." "Do you live here alone then?" Ryder asked, his knife pausing. "Since my father died 2 years ago, yes. Mother wanted me to move in with her, but..." Hazel shrugged. "This house was my father's pride. I couldn't bear to let it go." Ryder nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's a good house, solid. It needs work, Hazel admitted. The roof leaks when it rains hard and the north wall lets in drafts in winter. Father always meant to fix those things, but then he got sick. I could take a look at that roof tomorrow, Ryder offered casually. Least I could do to repay your kindness. Hazel turned to face him, hands on her hips. You're still healing. I'm well enough for roof work, he insisted. Been doing it since I was a boy. The following day, true to his word, Ryder climbed onto the roof despite Hazel's concerns. She watched anxiously from below as he moved carefully across the shingles, identifying the weak spots and repairing what he could with materials from the shed behind the house. Your father kept good tools, he called down to her. Man knew quality when he saw it. He always said a poor workman blames his tools, Hazel replied, smiling at the memory. By midday, the roof was patched, and Ryder had moved on to the drafty north wall, reinforcing it with boards that had been stored away for just such a purpose. Hazel brought him water and watched as he worked, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms tanned by the sun. The bullet wound was healing well, though it would leave a scar. You're staring, Miss Montgomery, Ryder said without looking up from his work. Hazel blushed, caught. I'm merely supervising Mr. Hayes, making sure you don't reopen that wound. His eyes met hers, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Is that all? Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Daniels, who rode up to the house on his aging mare. The sheriff was a portly man with a perpetually red face, more interested in collecting taxes than enforcing the law. Miss Montgomery, he called, tipping his hat. Heard you had a visitor staying with you. Thought I'd come by and make his acquaintance, official-like. Ryder straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Sheriff, he acknowledged with a nod. This is Ryder Hayes, Hazel introduced. Ryder, Sheriff Thomas Daniels. Hayes, the sheriff repeated, eyes narrowing. You the one got shot at the Silver Dollar last week? I am, Ryder confirmed. And who did the shooting? Man called Jenkins. Caught him slipping cards from his sleeve during a poker game. The sheriff grunted. Jenkins and his boys rode out the next morning, headed south from what I heard. He eyed Ryder suspiciously. You planning to go after them? No, sir, Ryder replied evenly. Got no quarrel with them now. Good, don't need any more trouble in my town. The sheriff turned his attention to Hazel. Miss Montgomery, your mother's been expressing some concern about your situation here. Hazel stiffened. Has she? Town's talking. Unmarried woman housing a strange man. It ain't proper. Mr. Hayes was gravely injured, Sheriff. Would you have preferred I let him die in the street? Course not. But now he's up and about, might be time for him to move on or make things proper. The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. Just passing along the sentiment is all. After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell between Hazel and Ryder. He resumed his work on the wall, his movements more measured, his back rigid with tension. I apologize for the sheriff, Hazel finally said, and for my mother's interference. Ryder set down his hammer. He's right, I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. You haven't imposed, Hazel insisted, and you're still healing. I'm healed enough to travel. Ryder wouldn't meet her eyes. I'll leave in the morning. And go where? He shrugged. Wherever the trail leads. Been drifting for years now. Is that what you want? Hazel asked quietly. To keep drifting? Ryder was silent for a long moment. What I want, he finally said, isn't always what's best. That evening, dinner was a subdued affair. Hazel wanted to ask him to stay but couldn't find the words. Ryder seemed distant, his thoughts elsewhere. After they'd cleaned up, he excused himself to the porch while Hazel remained inside, fighting back tears she didn't fully understand. She was startled by a knock at the door. Opening it, she found her mother on the doorstep, looking uncharacteristically contrite. May I come in? Margaret asked. Hazel stepped aside, bracing herself for another lecture. I've come to apologize, Margaret said, surprising her daughter. I shouldn't have spoken to the sheriff about your situation. It wasn't my place. No, it wasn't, Hazel agreed, but her anger had already begun to fade, though I understand your concern. Do you? Margaret sat at the kitchen table, removing her gloves. I don't think you do. It isn't your reputation I'm worried about, Hazel. It's your heart. My heart. I've seen the way you look at him, and the way he looks at you when you're not watching. Margaret sighed. He's a drifter, Hazel, a man with no roots, no home. Even if his intentions are honorable, what kind of life could he offer you? Perhaps the kind where I'm valued for who I am, not for what connections I bring, Hazel retorted, then immediately regretted her sharp tone. I'm sorry, Mother. But Ryder is leaving tomorrow anyway, so your concerns are unnecessary. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Is he? And how do you feel about that? Hazel turned away, busying herself with the tea kettle. It doesn't matter how I feel, he's made his decision. Hazel Elizabeth, look at me. Margaret waited until her daughter faced her. You are the most stubborn, independent woman I know, just like your father was stubborn and independent. If you want that man to stay, tell him so. Don't let pride stand in the way of happiness. It's not that simple, Hazel protested. Love rarely is, her mother replied. But letting it slip away without a fight is something you'll regret for the rest of your life. Trust me on this. After her mother left, Hazel stood in the kitchen, Margaret's words echoing in her mind. Outside, she could see Ryder's silhouette on the porch, a solitary figure against the deepening twilight. Taking a deep breath, she stepped outside. Ryder turned at the sound of the door, his face half in shadow. Everything all right? My mother came to apologize for interfering, Hazel said, moving to stand beside him at the porch railing. Decent of her. Yes, Hazel gathered her courage. Ryder, why are you leaving? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Because staying would only complicate things for you, he finally said. This town already sees you as the woman left at the altar. I won't have them thinking worse of you because of me. And what about what I think? Hazel challenged. Does that matter? Ryder turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the fading light. It matters more than you know. Then hear me now, I don't want you to go. Hazel, let me finish, she interrupted. When Robert left me at that altar, I thought my life was over. Not because I loved him, I realize now I never did, but because I believed he was my last chance at the future I'd been told I should want. And then you stumbled into my life, bleeding and half dead, and somehow in nursing you back to health, I found myself again. She took a step closer to him. I don't know what's between us or if you feel what I feel, but I know that the thought of you riding away tomorrow makes me wish you'd never recovered at all, and that's a terrible thing to think. Ryder's hand reached up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. And what is it you feel, Hazel Montgomery? I think I'm falling in love with you, she whispered. And it terrifies me. In answer, Ryder lowered his head and kissed her. It was a tender kiss, questioning at first, then deepening as Hazel responded, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I've wanted to do that since the first day I was strong enough to stand, Ryder admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Why didn't you? Because you deserved better than a drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and a saddle. Hazel smiled. I think I can decide for myself what I deserve, Mr. Hayes. And what's that? A man who sees me for who I am. A man who doesn't run when things get difficult. A man who can fix a roof and talk about books and kiss me like you just did. Ryder laughed softly. That's quite a list. I'm a woman who knows her mind, Hazel replied. So will you stay, not forever if that's not what you want, but for a while longer at least. I'll stay, Ryder promised. Though what the town will say, let them talk, Hazel said. I've lived my whole life worrying about what others think. I'm tired of it. That night, Ryder returned to the spare room where he'd been sleeping, but something fundamental had changed between them. The next morning, when Hazel emerged from her bedroom, she found Ryder in the kitchen, coffee already brewed and breakfast cooking on the stove. Good morning, he greeted her with a smile that made her heart flutter. Thought you might like some breakfast. You cook? Hazel asked, impressed. Man who's lived alone as long as I have learned to fend for himself, Ryder replied, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before her. It's not fancy, but it's edible. They ate together, discussing plans for the day. Ryder wanted to finish the repairs on the north wall, and Hazel needed to go into town for supplies. They moved around each other with an easy familiarity that belied the newness of their relationship. I'll come with you to town, Ryder offered as they cleared the breakfast dishes. Carry the supplies back for you. Hazel hesitated. Are you sure? People will talk even more if they see us together. Let them, Ryder said, echoing her words from the night before. I'm not ashamed to be seen with you, Hazel. Quite the opposite. The walk into Willow Creek was pleasant, the June morning warm but not yet hot. Ryder and Hazel strolled side by side, not touching but close enough that their hands occasionally brushed, sending a thrill through Hazel each time. As expected, their appearance in town together caused quite a stir. Women paused in their shopping to watch them pass, whispering behind gloved hands. Men nodded to Ryder with new respect in their eyes or, in some cases, open suspicion. At the general store, Mr. Perlman greeted them with professional courtesy, though his eyes darted between them with undisguised curiosity. Miss Montgomery, Mr. Hayes, what can I get for you today? Hazel handed over her list. Just the usual supplies, Mr. Perlman. As the storekeeper gathered her items, the bell above the door jingled, and Hazel turned to see Robert Caldwell, Jr., enter the shop. He stopped short at the sight of her, his face flushing crimson. Hazel, he said, recovering his composure. I'd heard you were back in town. I never left, Robert, Hazel replied coolly. Unlike some people, I keep my commitments. Robert's gaze shifted to Ryder, who had moved protectively closer to Hazel's side. And who might this be? Ryder Hayes. Ryder introduced himself, extending a hand that Robert reluctantly shook. Mr. Hayes is staying with me while he recovers from an injury, Hazel explained, chin lifted in defiance. Robert's eyebrows shot up. Is he indeed? How charitable of you. Miss Montgomery saved my life, Ryder said, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. I owe her everything. How dramatic, Robert sneered. Well, I won't keep you from your nursing duties, Hazel. Good day to you both. After he left, Ryder placed a hand on the small of Hazel's back. You all right? Yes, she said, surprised to find it was true. Seeing Robert had stirred no emotion in her beyond a mild irritation. He's nothing to me now. They completed their shopping and were about to leave when Sheriff Daniels entered the store, his expression grim. Hayes, he called. Got a minute? Ryder nodded, following the sheriff outside while Hazel waited anxiously by the door. Just got word, the sheriff said in a low voice. Jenkins and his boys are back in town, staying at the Willow Creek Hotel. Thought you should know. Appreciate the warning, Ryder replied. I've no quarrel with them if they've none with me. Just watch your back, the sheriff advised, and maybe keep Miss Montgomery out of it. Jenkins has a reputation for holding grudges. As they walked back to Hazel's house, laden with supplies, Ryder was unusually quiet. Hazel could sense his tension in the set of his shoulders and the tight line of his jaw. What did the sheriff want? She finally asked. Just letting me know that the man who shot me is back in town, Ryder said, trying to sound casual. Hazel stopped in her tracks. The one who shot you. Here in Willow Creek, it's nothing to worry about, Ryder assured her. I'm not looking for trouble. But what if trouble is looking for you? Hazel pressed. These men shot you once already. I'll be careful, Ryder promised, and I won't let any harm come to you. But Hazel wasn't satisfied. Maybe we should leave town for a while, visit my uncle's ranch in the next county until these men move on. Run away, you mean? Ryder shook his head. That's not my way, Hazel, and I don't think it's yours either. She couldn't argue with that. Running had never been her nature. But the thought of losing Ryder just when she'd found him filled her with dread. They returned to the house in thoughtful silence. As they put away the supplies, Hazel noticed Ryder checking his revolver, making sure it was clean and loaded. You don't think it will come to that, do you? She asked, nodding at the gun. I hope not, Ryder replied honestly, but hope isn't much protection in this world. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hazel's hand clasped in Ryder's. Despite the threat hanging over them, there was a contentment in the moment that Hazel wished she could preserve forever. Tell me about your ranch in Wyoming, she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. Ryder's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand as he spoke. It wasn't much. 100 acres in the Big Horn Basin, good water, decent grazing. Built the house myself, just a small cabin but solid, had plans to expand it someday. What happened? Man named Hargrove decided he wanted my land, Ryder's voice hardened. He was buying up all the small ranches in the area, building an empire. When I wouldn't sell, he found other ways to persuade me. What ways? Hazel asked, though she feared she knew the answer. First it was warnings. Dead cattle left on my property, then my fences were cut, my stock scattered. One night they burned my barn with my best horses inside. Ryder's grip on her hand tightened. I fought back as best I could, but one man against many. The final straw came when they diverted the creek that watered my land. Without that water, the ranch was worthless. So you left, Hazel said softly. I left, Ryder confirmed. Been drifting ever since, taking work where I can find it. Cowhand wrangler, sometimes bounty hunter when times were lean. Do you ever think of going back, fighting for what's yours? Ryder was quiet for a moment. I used to dream of it, going back with enough men and guns to take on Hargrove and his outfit. But revenge is a poison, Hazel. I've seen what it does to men. It's not revenge to want justice, Hazel argued. Maybe not, Ryder conceded. But justice is hard to come by in this part of the country. They fell silent, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. Hazel wondered what it would be like to live on a ranch with Ryder, to build something together. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. What are you thinking? Ryder asked, noticing her pensive expression. I was thinking about possibilities, Hazel replied, about what might be if things were different. Ryder turned to face her, his expression serious in the gathering darkness. Hazel, I can't offer you much. I'm a man without land or prospects. But if you'll have me, I promise to work every day to be worthy of you. Hazel's heart swelled. Are you proposing to me, Ryder Hayes? I'm saying that I love you, he answered simply. And if you'll give me time to establish myself again, to build something real, then yes, I'd count it the greatest honor of my life to make you my wife. Tears sprang to Hazel's eyes. I don't need time. I don't need a grand house or fine things. I just need you. Ryder pulled her into his arms, his kiss deep and passionate. Hazel clung to him, pouring all her hope and love into the embrace. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Stay with me tonight, Hazel whispered against his lips. Ryder pulled back slightly, searching her face. Are you sure? If we do this, there's no going back. I won't dishonor you and leave. I've never been more sure of anything, Hazel replied. Taking his hand, she led him inside, closing the door on the world outside. The next morning, Hazel woke to find Ryder watching her, his blue eyes soft with affection. The intimacy they had shared had transformed something between them, deepening their connection in ways Hazel hadn't anticipated. Good morning, she murmured, suddenly shy despite their closeness. Morning, Ryder replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're beautiful when you sleep. Only when I sleep, she teased. Especially when you sleep, he amended, kissing her lightly. But always. They lay together in comfortable silence, the early morning light filtering through the curtains. Hazel traced the scar on Ryder's side, thinking how close she had come to never knowing him. What happens now? She asked. Now, Ryder said, I find a way to make a living here. I won't be a burden to you, Hazel. You could never be a burden, she protested. A man needs his pride, Ryder insisted gently. I heard the Jameson spread is looking for a new foreman. Thought I'd ride out there today, see if they're still hiring. Hazel nodded, understanding his need to establish himself. The Jamesons are good people, fair employers. They rose and dressed, sharing a simple breakfast before Ryder prepared to ride to the Jameson ranch. As he saddled his horse, which had been recovering in Hazel's small stable, she came out to see him off. Be careful, she urged, straightening his collar. Not just of Jenkins and his men, but on the trail. The Jameson place is a good 3 hours' ride. I'll be back before sundown, Ryder promised, bending to kiss her. Lock the doors while I'm gone, just to be safe. After he rode away, Hazel returned to the house, her mind already filling with plans and possibilities. If Ryder got the foreman position, they could marry soon. The Jamesons provided a house for their foreman, not large but comfortable. They could start a life together, perhaps even save enough to buy their own land someday. Hazel was so absorbed in these thoughts that she didn't hear the riders approaching until they were nearly at her door. Looking out the window, she saw 3 men dismounting rough-looking characters with the dust of the trail still on their clothes. One of them, a tall man with a pockmarked face, she recognized as Jenkins from the saloon. Her heart racing, Hazel reached for her father's shotgun, which hung above the fireplace. She had just taken it down when a heavy knock sounded at the door. Miss Montgomery, called a voice. "We're looking for Ryder Hayes. Heard he might be staying here." Hazel took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Mr. Hayes isn't here," she called back, "and I'd appreciate it if you gentlemen would leave my property." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Now, miss, we just want to talk to him, settle a little misunderstanding." "The kind of misunderstanding that involves shooting an unarmed man," Hazel challenged. "I think not. Please leave or I'll be forced to defend myself." The door rattled as someone tested the lock. "You hear that, boys? The little lady's gonna defend herself." Hazel raised the shotgun, aiming it at the door. "I'm not bluffing, Mr. Jenkins. My father taught me to shoot when I was 12 years old, and I won the county fair shooting contest 3 years running." Another voice, lower and more cautious, spoke up. "Come on, Jenkins, this ain't worth it. Hayes cheated you fair and square. Let's just ride on." "Not until I get my money back," Jenkins insisted. "Hayes took $500 off me that night." "Because you were cheating," Hazel retorted. "As I understand it, that money wasn't rightfully yours to begin with." There was silence for a moment, then the sound of a match being struck. Hazel smelled smoke and realized with horror that they were planning to burn her out. "Stop," she shouted. "The sheriff knows you're in town. If anything happens to me or my home, he'll hunt you down." "Sheriff Daniels couldn't hunt down his own shadow," Jenkins scoffed, but Hazel heard the uncertain murmurs of his companions. "Maybe so," came a new voice, "but I sure as hell can." Hazel's heart leaped as she recognized Ryder's voice. Looking out the window, she saw him standing in the yard, his gun drawn and pointed at Jenkins. He must have circled back for some reason and arrived just in time. "Hayes," Jenkins spat, "been looking for you." "So I hear," Ryder replied evenly. "Drop that torch and step away from the house." Jenkins hesitated, calculating his odds. His two companions had already backed away, clearly wanting no part of what was to come. "It's 3 against 1, Hayes," Jenkins said, though he didn't sound as confident as before. "Look again," Ryder suggested. As if on cue, Sheriff Daniels rode into the yard, his deputy close behind. "That's enough, Jenkins," the sheriff called. "Drop your weapons, all of you." Outnumbered and outgunned, Jenkins and his men surrendered. As the sheriff and his deputy led them away, Ryder rushed to the house, pounding on the door. "Hazel, are you all right?" She unbolted the door and flew into his arms, the shotgun clattering to the floor. "I'm fine. But why did you come back?" "Forgot my gloves," Ryder admitted, holding her tight. "Best mistake I ever made when I saw their horses outside." He shuddered. "If anything had happened to you." "Nothing happened," Hazel assured him, pulling back to look into his face. "I'm fine. We're both fine." Ryder cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Hazel Montgomery. I don't want to wait to make you my wife. Life's too uncertain, too precious to waste a single day." "What about the Jameson job, building a future first?" "We'll build it together," Ryder said. "I don't need anything but you." 2 weeks later, Hazel stood once again in the small church of Willow Creek, but this time there was no expensive gown, no elaborate preparations. She wore a simple blue dress that matched Ryder's eyes and carried a bouquet of wildflowers from her garden. The church was filled not with society guests, but with the people who truly mattered: her mother, the Jamesons, who had indeed hired Ryder as their new foreman, and the handful of loyal friends who had stood by her through her previous humiliation. As Hazel walked down the aisle toward Ryder, who waited for her with love shining in his eyes, she felt no trace of the nervousness or doubt that had plagued her on that other wedding day. This was right. This was meant to be. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Hazel barely heard the familiar words as she lost herself in Ryder's gaze. When it came time to speak their vows, his voice was strong and sure. "I, Ryder James Hayes, take you, Hazel Elizabeth Montgomery, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." Hazel's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the vows, overcome with emotion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The small reception was held at Margaret Montgomery's home, where the newlyweds were showered with well wishes and gifts. Mr. Jameson pulled Ryder aside at one point, clapping him on the shoulder. I've been meaning to tell you, Hayes. The old Miller place adjacent to my north pasture, it's for sale. 160 acres, good water, decent house that needs some work. Might be just the thing for a man looking to start his own spread. Ryder's eyes widened. I appreciate the information, sir, but I don't have that kind of money. Bank's willing to finance most of it for the right buyer, Jameson continued. And I'd be willing to stake you for the down payment. Consider it an advance on your wages, if you like. That's generous, Mr. Jameson, but not generosity, the rancher interrupted. Investment. I need good neighbors, and you've proven yourself a hard worker these past 2 weeks. Think about it, talk it over with your bride. Offers open. That night, in the foreman's house on the Jameson ranch that would be their home for now, Ryder told Hazel about the conversation. Our own land, she breathed, eyes shining. Ryder, it's perfect. It would be years of hard work, he cautioned, building up a herd, making the place profitable, and being in debt to Jameson. We're not afraid of hard work, Hazel reminded him. And Mr. Jameson is a fair man. If he's offering this opportunity, it's because he believes in you. In us, Ryder corrected, pulling her closer. Everything I do now, I do for us. 6 months later, on a crisp December morning, Ryder and Hazel Hayes stood on the porch of their newly repaired farmhouse, surveying their land. The 160 acres of the old Miller place stretched before them, the eastern pasture already fenced for the small herd of cattle they'd purchased as the foundation of their operation. It's not much yet, Ryder said, his arm around Hazel's waist, but give us a few years. It's everything, Hazel replied, leaning into him. And I have news that might change our timeline a bit. Ryder looked down at her, eyebrows raised in question. We're going to have a baby, Hazel announced, her face glowing with joy. Come summer, there will be 3 of us on this ranch. Ryder stared at her in wonder before sweeping her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. A baby, Hazel, that's incredible. Setting her gently back on her feet, he knelt before her, placing his hands on her still flat stomach. Hello in there, little one, he said softly. Your mama and I can't wait to meet you. Looking up at his wife, Ryder's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I never thought I could be this happy, he confessed. When I drifted into Willow Creek that day, bleeding and half dead, I thought my luck had run out. And I thought being left at the altar was the worst thing that could happen to me, Hazel replied, stroking his hair. How wrong we both were. Ryder stood, gathering her close. I thank God every day for guiding me to you, even for the bullet that brought us together, Hazel teased. Even for that, Ryder agreed with a chuckle. Though I'd prefer not to repeat that particular experience. As they stood together, watching the sun rise over their land, Hazel thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. A jilted bride, a dying cowboy, and the courage to see beyond convention to the love that waited for them both. What shall we name the baby? She asked, her hand covering Ryder's where it rested protectively over her abdomen. If it's a boy, how about Thomas, after your father? Ryder suggested. And if it's a girl, Hazel mused, perhaps Grace. Grace, Ryder repeated, nodding. Perfect for the child who represents the grace that brought us together. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Hayes family. Grace was born in the summer of 1879, a healthy baby girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, she was joined by a brother, Thomas, and 3 years after that by another sister, Emma. The ranch prospered under Ryder and Hazel's care, growing from the original 160 acres to over 500 as they gradually purchased adjacent parcels of land. The Hayes brand became known throughout the territory for quality cattle and fair dealing. In the spring of 1888, 10 years after that fateful day when a wounded cowboy stumbled into the life of a jilted bride, Ryder and Hazel stood once again on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Grace, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Emma how to jump rope, while 7-year-old Thomas practiced his roping skills on a wooden calf Ryder had built for him. We did well, didn't we? Hazel said, leaning against her husband's solid strength. Better than I ever dreamed possible, Ryder agreed, his arm around her shoulders. And it all started with you being brave enough to help a stranger. Or with you being stubborn enough to survive a bullet wound, Hazel countered with a smile. Either way, Ryder said, turning to face her, I'd say we're the luckiest two people in Montana territory. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting a golden glow over their home and land, Ryder kissed his wife with the same tenderness he'd shown on that first night on her porch so many years ago. Their journey had begun with a gunshot and a wedding dress stained with blood, but it had led to a life filled with love, family, and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting together. I love you, Hazel Hayes, Ryder whispered against her lips. And I love you, my wounded cowboy, she replied, always and forever. The children's laughter rang out across the yard, a joyful counterpoint to the lowing of cattle in the distance and the gentle rustling of wind through the cottonwoods that lined their creek. This was their legacy. Hazel thought not just the land and the brand, but the love they had built together, a love that had begun in the most unexpected of circumstances, and had grown to encompass a family, a home, and a future brighter than either of them could have imagined on that dusty street in Willow Creek all those years ago.